What are three misconceptions about African military history that you want to clear up?
Okay, these are big ones. I'm going to try to keep it. So I think the first is that African nations did not have effective militaries. Oftentimes people look at colonization as proof positive that these martial arts and military systems didn't work. But one of the things that we have to understand about martial arts and military history is that the ability to fight is only half the battle. Politics, resources, access to manpower, these are all other things that impact whether or not a nation is able to fight off another nation, or even things like political intrigue. You have, for example, the whole idea of like the scramble for Africa, where much of the scramble for Africa, the colonization of that period was not done on the battlefield, it was done on paper. I'll explain. So say, for example, I'm coming from, and actually, perfect example, the war between Italy and Ethiopia in the 1890s. So a common practice would be, if I come to your country and I want to sign a trade agreement with you, I'm going to have two contracts, one written in your language and one written in mine, assuming that literacy is something that's important to your culture, because a lot of cultures are oral cultures or symbolic cultures, right? But assuming your culture can read and write, I'll have a contract. Now, the contract that you sign that you can understand that is in your language will clearly set out the terms as we've discussed them. On my contract, in my language, it's going to be slightly changed so that you become a protectorate of my country. So then what ends up happening is I can steamroll my soldiers in and I can say, well, look at the contract. This is what the contract says. It says I can do this, that, and the other thing. And it's done in such a slow and methodical way that before you realize it, the nation's essentially been taken over. And a lot of the people have either been won over, or the risk of a military conflict between the two nations is just too high. So understanding that the colonization of Africa was not a result of a failure of Africa's military, but more a question of a collection of factors that ended up leading to the countries ending up as part of colonies. And the ones who were quick to realize it were able to do something about it and at least either stave it off or defeat it entirely, while a lot of other countries who frankly did not have the manpower to fight the British Empire in 1890 simply just couldn't. Another would be that African martial arts don't exist. African martial arts do exist. There are traditions, there are practices, there are techniques, there are documents, there is a documented history. Martial arts from Africa and its diaspora are a thing. They exist and they are very much alive. And it's important for us to at least pay homage to them and at least give them a little bit of time in the sun so we can see sort of the beauty of the cultures. And so the third is one that I come across a lot, and that is that the martial arts of Asia were started by Africans. They were not. Every culture has its own martial traditions. Some of them may have been influenced by their neighbors. Some of them may have been brought in by invasions. Some of them may have been influenced by major figures. For example, how Kung Fu, as we identify it, was heavily inspired by a monk from southern India, right?
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that Kung Fu is any less Chinese, because it's from China. It has the language is, the various languages that come from China. The cultural context is Chinese. Like, it's Chinese. It's just that in the very early days of what we would consider Kung Fu, a Buddhist monk from southern India trained his students in what he had learned in his practices as a monk in southern India. If you get a chance to look up Bodhidharma, his life is super interesting. But in any case, so there's that. So African martial arts are from Africa, Asian martial arts are from Asia, European martial arts are from Europe. There was some exchange as a result of trade and conquest and warfare, but martial arts from Asia are Asian martial arts.